Welcome everyone to our deep dive into the world of Xenocrates. Now, he was a philosopher who led Plato's academy after Speusippus.
Yeah.
We're talking 339-3338 BCE,
Yeah.
until his death in 314-3333 CE.
Okay.
That's a solid 25 years, leading one of the most influential intellectual hubs in ancient Greece.
Wow.
But there's a bit of a catch here.
Yeah.
While Xenocrates wrote like crazy, it seems like none of his works have survived.
It's true, sadly. I mean, just imagine all those insights lost to time. But there's good news.
Okay.
We can still piece his ideas together from fragments and commentaries. We often have to look through the lens of his critics, though, like Aristotle.
Oh, so it's like a philosophical puzzle that we're going to try to solve here.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay. All right, well, let's start with what we do know then. It seems Xenocrates wasn't one to completely reinvent the wheel, philosophically speaking. He was really dedicated to carrying on Plato's legacy.
Exactly. And you can see this in the way he divides philosophy into three branches: physics, ethics, and logic. Now, that probably sounds pretty familiar, right?
Yeah.
It's the basic framework that became standard in Hellenistic philosophy.
Right.
But while he, really emphasized this division, it was already kind of there in Plato's work.
So he was more like a curator of Plato's ideas, just highlighting and making them a little bit more explicit.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
Now, when we dig into Xenocrates' physics, and remember, for the ancient Greeks, this included metaphysics and natural philosophy.
Right.
This is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
He was totally on board with Plato's later theory of forms.
Okay.
But of course, he added his own twist.
Oh, okay.
He believed that forms are actually generated as numbers.
Oh, wait, hold on. Instead of those eternal and abstract blueprints that we usually associate with forms,
Right. Yeah.
Xenocrates is saying they're numbers.
That's what he's saying.
That's a pretty bold claim.
It is. And to really get it, we need to understand how Xenocrates thought about numbers in the first place. He was careful to distinguish between what he called formal numbers and mathematical numbers.
Okay, so formal numbers are those like the forms themselves.
Right.
Like unique singular entities.
Exactly. Like there's just one formal 2 and one formal 3 and so on.
Yeah.
They're like the essence of two-ness and threeness.
Okay. I think I'm starting to get it.
Uh,
So formal numbers, like the Platonic ideal of a number,
Yeah.
but then we have those everyday numbers we use to count or, do
Yeah.
calculations. Those are the mathematical numbers.
exactly. So we can have like tons of instances of the mathematical number 2.
Right.
But there's only one formal 2 that actually captures what it means to be 2.
Okay.
And here's where Xenocrates really goes out on a limb, even for some Platonists.
Okay.
He identifies formal numbers with mathematical numbers.
Okay.
Basically, he's saying we can do all math, addition, subtraction, geometry, everything,
Yeah.
using just these unique, singular formal numbers.
Whoa, that's pretty wild.
Yeah. It definitely raised some eyebrows.
Yeah, I can imagine. Even among Plato fans, this might have been a tough one to swallow.
Absolutely. And of course, Aristotle, he always loved a good philosophical debate.
Of course. Yeah.
He had some serious objections.
Okay.
He argued that if all numbers are these, unique, one-of-a-kind entities,
Yeah.
then actual math becomes impossible.
It's like trying to bake a cake, but you can't actually use flour. You only have the idea of flour.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so we've got these two titans clashing here.
Yeah.
We have Xenocrates with his vision of a universe structured by these unique formal numbers. And then we have Aristotle pointing out the logical and practical issues with that.
Yeah, he was big on logic.
Yeah. But Xenocrates, he didn't stop there.
Of course not.
He throws in another curveball
He does.
with his idea of indivisible lines.
Ah, yes. Indivisible lines.
Right.
This is where he gets, let's say, creative. He proposes that there are these fundamental lines that can't be divided any further.
So it's like saying there's a smallest possible unit of length.
Yeah.
A point where you can't divide a line any further.
Exactly.
Okay, now that really makes you think. It goes against pretty much everything we know about geometry.
It does. It does.
I mean, isn't the whole point of a line that you can just keep dividing it forever?
You would think. And
Yeah.
of course, Aristotle, Mr. Logic himself, he wrote a whole treatise called On Indivisible Lines
Oh, wow.
to refute this idea.
Yeah.
Now, whether he was specifically targeting Xenocrates, that's still up for debate.
Okay.
But the point is, this whole idea of indivisible lines was, controversial, to put it mildly.
Yeah, very controversial.
Correct, yeah.
So how did Xenocrates fit this into his understanding of the universe? where do these indivisible lines go in the big picture?
Okay, so think back to the idea of a universe built on those foundational forms,
Okay.
which Xenocrates believed were numbers.
Right.
In his view, the universe unfolds in a specific order,
Okay.
starting with those forms numbers.
Okay.
Then you get your indivisible lines.
Okay.
Then you get planes.
Okay.
Then solids.
Okay.
And finally, you get those celestial bodies and all the everyday objects we see.
Okay, so it's not just like a random mix of numbers and lines.
Yo.
There's like a cosmic architecture to it all.
Exactly. There's a deliberate order.
Okay. And speaking of architecture, Xenocrates also had some pretty specific ideas about the divine realm.
He did. And this is where his love for geometry really takes a theological turn.
Okay.
He actually associated gods, daimons, and us, mere mortals, with different types of triangles.
Triangles, seriously.
Serious.
Hey, tell me more. I'm hooked. What kind of triangles are we talking about?
Okay, so according to Plutarch,
Okay.
Xenocrates linked the gods with equilateral triangles.
Okay.
All sides equal, perfect symmetry.
Right. Makes sense.
Right. Daimons, who are kind of like these intermediary beings between gods and humans.
Okay.
They get the isosceles triangles. Two sides equal, not quite as perfect.
Okay, one step down.
Exactly. And us humans,
Yeah.
we're stuck with the scaling triangles. No sides equal, kind of wonky, you know?
You can really see the symbolism there. You've
Oh.
got the equilateral triangle representing that divine perfection of the gods.
Exactly.
Then the isosceles, a step down,
Right.
reflecting the intermediary nature of the daimons.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's us, just the humble, scaling humans.
Exactly.
But it's more than just symbolism, though, right?
It is.
What was Xenocrates really trying to say by connecting triangles with divine beings?
Well, you have to remember that for the ancient Greeks, geometry wasn't just about these abstract shapes.
Right.
It was a way to understand the fundamental order and harmony of the entire universe.
Okay.
So by linking different kinds of beings with different triangles, he might have been hinting at a hierarchical structure for the cosmos itself.
Okay, so we've got this universe built on numbers,
Yeah.
indivisible lines, and a divine realm of triangles.
Yeah.
It's a pretty wild picture so far.
It is.
But what about humans in all this?
Yeah.
How did Xenocrates see our ability to learn and know things within this huge geometric cosmos?
That's a great question.
Did he have his own special take on epistemology?
He did. And like most of his work, it's really rooted in Plato's ideas.
Okay.
But of course, with those classic Xenocrates twists,
All right.
he outlines this really interesting, although maybe a little complicated theory,
Okay.
where he divides everything that exists into three categories:
Mm-hmm.
the perceptible, the intelligible, and the believable.
3 categories. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's unpack those a bit.
Sure.
Perceptible. I'm guessing that's all the stuff we experience with our senses,
You got it.
like the sights, the sounds, the textures, all that.
That's right. The perceptible realm is all about sensory experience. It's the world we perceive through our 5 senses.
Yeah.
But Xenocrates argues that this kind of knowledge, although it's important,
Mm-hmm.
it's limited.
Okay.
It can't give us that real, solid, unshakable knowledge.
So our senses can be deceiving.
Not necessarily deceiving, but definitely limited in what they can tell us.
Okay, I see.
Our senses give us information about the physical world, but it's just a partial and often fleeting glimpse.
Okay.
Real knowledge for Xenocrates
Yeah.
that lies beyond what we experience with our senses.
Right. So where do we find that kind of absolute knowledge? Is this where the intelligible realm comes in?
Exactly.
And are we talking about those form numbers again?
You're on the right track.
Okay.
The intelligible realm is the domain of those perfect eternal forms.
Yeah.
Those numerical blueprints we talked about.
Right.
And Xenocrates, following Plato's lead, he believed that true knowledge, what he called epistemonic logos,
Okay.
that can only be achieved by understanding those forms.
So for Xenocrates, true knowledge isn't about sensory experiences. It's about understanding those fundamental numerical principles that underlie reality.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay, I see. But what about believable? That's a really interesting category.
It is.
What did he mean by that?
This is where Xenocrates gets really specific.
Okay.
He connects the believable with the celestial realm,
Mm,
the stars, the planets, all those heavenly bodies.
okay.
And he says that our understanding of those things, while it's useful, it only falls under belief, not true knowledge.
So even though we can observe the heavens, we can track their movements, we can come up with all these complicated astronomical theories,
Right.
our knowledge about the cosmos is still just belief.
Exactly. And it's not that he's dismissing our attempts to understand the universe.
Okay.
It's more that he's recognizing how limited our knowledge is.
Okay.
Especially when we're dealing with something as complex and ever-changing as the movements of those celestial bodies.
Right, right.
Our astronomical theories are always changing as we get new observations and interpretations.
That's a really good point. Even today, with all our fancy technology and scientific tools,
Right.
there's still so much mystery and wonder when we look up at the night sky.
Absolutely.
We're always revising our theories about the universe. We're pushing the boundaries of what we know.
Yeah.
But I think we also have to admit we might never have a complete and final picture.
I think Xenocrates would agree with that.
Yeah.
With his view on knowledge and belief, he really understood that true knowledge is a journey, not a destination.
Yeah, that's great. So we have these three realms of knowing. The perceptible, where our senses give us a peek into the physical world. The intelligible, where we try to grasp those eternal forms and gain true knowledge.
Right.
And the believable, where we deal with the complexities of the celestial realm. We form beliefs based on what we observe and calculate, but we always have to be ready to revise those beliefs.
Exactly.
It's a really interesting way to think about the nature of knowledge and the limits of what we can understand.
It is, and it shows Xenocrates' commitment to both the power and the limitations of human reason.
Okay.
He believed we could achieve genuine knowledge,
Yeah.
but he also knew that some parts of reality would always remain mysterious.
And it strikes me that this approach to knowledge is so relevant today, even with all the information we have access to.
It is.
I mean, we're flooded with data and opinions from everywhere.
Right.
It's more important now than ever to be able to tell the difference between what we can really know and what's just belief or speculation.
I agree. Xenocrates' framework gives us some really helpful tools to navigate all that.
Yeah.
It encourages us to think critically, question our assumptions, and be open to new ideas.
It's a good reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is a never-ending process.
Exactly.
It's a lifelong journey of exploring and discovering.
Absolutely.
Well, I think we've done a pretty thorough deep dive into Xenocrates' philosophical world today.
I think so, too.
We explored his unique ideas about the soul, the cosmos, and the nature of knowledge.
Yeah.
And even though we only have these fragments of his work to go on,
Yeah.
I think we've put together a pretty good picture of who he was.
We have.
He dared to think differently, to challenge the status quo, and to push the limits of philosophy.
He really did.
And I think he left a real mark on the history of Western thought.
He did.
You know, he reminds us that philosophy isn't just this dead thing in the past.
Right.
It's a living tradition,
It is.
a conversation that continues across time and cultures. And even though his voice might be quiet across all those centuries,
Yeah.
his ideas still speak to us.
They do.
They challenge us to think more deeply about the world and our place in it.
Absolutely.
So until our next deep dive,
Yeah.
keep those philosophical gears turning.
I will.
All right,
You too.
I will.
Good.
See you next time.
Sounds good. Welcome back to our deep dive into Xenocrates. We're going to tackle one of his most interesting and maybe most mysterious ideas.
Yep.
His concept of the soul as a, get this, self-moving number.
Oh, a self-moving number.
Yeah.
When I first heard that, my mind went, what?
It's definitely a head-scratcher. But to understand it, we got to remember the context of ancient Greek thought.
Okay.
Numbers weren't just, abstract symbols for them.
Right.
They were deeply connected to the very structure of reality. They were the key to understanding the cosmos, the human soul, everything.
Right, they had that whole Pythagorean thing going on.
Yeah, exactly.
Where numbers were like the building blocks of the universe.
That's it.
So when Xenocrates talks about the soul as a self-moving number, he's drawing on that tradition.
Right.
But how does that actually work in his theory?
Well, remember how Xenocrates believed that the forms, those eternal blueprints for everything,
Yeah.
he thought they were actually numbers.
Right.
And since the soul can know those forms,
Yeah.
he thought it must also have a numerical nature itself.
Okay, so that's the number part. But what about the self-moving part? How does he bring movement into this idea of a numerical soul?
Good question. This is where he connects it to another key part of the soul.
Okay.
Its ability to initiate action and movement. Xenocrates, like Plato, believed that the soul was the source of motion in living things.
Okay.
It's what gives our bodies life and drives our behavior.
Right.
And since he identifies the soul with number,
Yeah.
it follows that this number has to be able to start motion on its own.
So it's a self-moving number.
Exactly.
Wow, that's actually pretty clever. He's bringing together these two big aspects of the soul,
Yeah.
the cognitive, the thinking part, and the motivic, the part that makes us act,
Exactly.
into this one, elegant idea.
Yeah, he was good at that.
But I'm sure this wasn't just some abstract philosophical game.
Yeah.
What were the implications of this for Xenocrates? How did it change his view of what it means to be human?
It was huge. It meant that humans, because of their souls, had a spark of the divine, a connection to those eternal forms. And this connection, it allowed them to reason, to make choices, to act in the world.
So it's not just about having a soul, it's about the specific nature of that soul.
Right.
Its numerical essence that makes humans different.
Exactly.
And gives them this capacity for rational thought and action.
That's it.
But I bet this idea, as innovative as it was, probably caused some controversy.
Oh, you know it did.
What did other philosophers, especially those in Plato's Academy, think about this self-moving number concept?
It definitely sparked some debates.
I can imagine.
Some people thought it was a brilliant way to bring together those cognitive and motivic parts of the soul.
Okay.
Others, though, thought it was too abstract, too focused on numbers.
Yeah.
They couldn't really see how a number, even a self-moving one, could explain all the complexities of human consciousness and experience.
I get their point.
Yeah.
It does seem like a big jump to go from numbers to feelings and emotions and all the messy stuff that makes us human.
It is. And of course, Aristotle never one to back down from a good philosophical argument.
Of course.
He had some sharp criticisms. He said that just because the soul can understand those numerical forms doesn't mean it's a number itself.
Right.
He said it's like saying, because I can enjoy a beautiful symphony, I must be a symphony myself.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Right.
It shows that you can't just equate something with what it knows.
Exactly.
So Aristotle is pushing back against this idea of a numerical soul, even though he agrees that it's connected to those numerical forms.
Right. But he didn't stop there.
Oh, of course not.
He also had a problem with the whole self-motion idea.
Okay.
He argued that motion in the physical world always involves a cause and effect.
Okay, yeah.
Something moves because something else makes it move.
Right, like a ball is kicked or a cart is pulled.
Exactly. There's always an external force.
So how can something be self-moving if motion always needs an outside cause? That seems like a contradiction.
It does.
Did Xenocrates have an answer to that?
Unfortunately, we don't have his direct response.
Oh.
It's like a page is missing from the philosophical debate.
Too bad.
I know. But we can, speculate a bit.
Yeah.
Maybe Xenocrates would say that the soul's self-motion works on a different principle than physical motion.
Okay.
Maybe it's more like an internal impulse, a kind of self-direction that doesn't need an external push or pull.
That's an interesting thought. It suggests that maybe Xenocrates was trying to get at something deeper than our usual understanding of motion, something more like will or intention.
Yeah, maybe.
But even if we don't have all the answers, I think it's still worth thinking about these questions,
absolutely.
to wrestle with those big mysteries that philosophers have been debating for centuries.
It's an invitation to join that conversation,
Yeah.
to think about the nature of the soul, the relationship between mind and body, the whole idea of self-motion.
These are questions that still matter to us today, even with all our scientific advances. I mean, we might have mapped the human genome and explored outer space, but we're still trying to figure out who we are and what makes us tick.
We are. And Xenocrates, with his bold ideas, he gives us a really good starting point for exploring those mysteries.
Right. He reminds us that philosophy isn't just about finding answers. It's about asking the right questions.
Yeah.
The questions that push us to the edge of what we know and make us think in new ways.
It's about pushing those boundaries.
And on that note, let's move on to another cool part of Xenocrates' thought.
Okay.
His cosmology. His understanding of the universe as a whole. Remember that sequence of numbers, lines, planes, and solids we talked about earlier?
I do.
Well, that's super important for how we saw the cosmos coming into being and how it keeps working.
Right.
Okay, I'm ready for another mind-blowing trip.
Me too. Let's jump in.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of Xenocrates. We've gone through his fascinating ideas about the soul as a self-moving number and his view of a cosmos built on this hierarchy of numbers, lines, planes, and solids. But we have one last piece to explore, his epistemology.
Yeah, it's really interesting how Xenocrates tackled this basic question of how we acquire knowledge. Like, what can we truly know and how can we be sure of it? These questions have kept philosophers busy for ages, and Xenocrates, he offers this unique perspective shaped by his Platonist background.
I'm really curious to hear how he approached this. From what we've seen so far, he wasn't afraid to think outside the box. He challenged the usual ways of thinking and really pushed the boundaries of philosophy.
Yeah.
So I'm expecting some pretty mind-blowing stuff about the nature of knowledge.
You won't be disappointed. Remember Plato's famous analogy of the divided line?
Yeah.
He used it to show the different levels of knowledge, from those shadowy sensory experiences to that clear light of true knowledge of the forms. Well, Xenocrates takes this idea and really develops it, adding his own unique twists.
Okay, so he's building on that solid Platonic foundation, but adding his own layers of complexity.
Exactly.
All right, I'm ready. Tell me how Xenocrates reimagined those levels of reality.
Well, he divides everything that exists into three categories: the perceptible, the intelligible, and, here's where it gets interesting, the believable.
3 categories. That's different from Plato's 2-level system.
It is.
Okay, let's break them down. The perceptible, that's the realm of our senses, right? The world we experience through sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell.
Exactly. It's the world of everyday experience, the things we perceive through our senses.
Yeah.
But Xenocrates says that the knowledge we get through our senses, while important, is limited.
Okay.
It can't give us true, certain knowledge.
So are you saying our senses can be deceiving?
Yeah.
We can't trust what we see, hear, or feel?
Not necessarily deceiving, but limited in what they can show us.
I see.
Our senses give us information about the physical world, but it's often just a partial and temporary glimpse. True knowledge, for Xenocrates, is beyond the realm of the senses.
Okay, I understand. So where do we find this real, solid knowledge then? This is where the intelligible realm comes in, right?
Exact.
And are we back to those form numbers?
You got it. The intelligible realm is where those perfect eternal forms exist, those numerical principles that are the basis of everything. And Xenocrates, following Plato, believed that true knowledge, what he called epistemonic logos, could only be achieved by understanding those forms.
So it's not about what we can perceive with our senses, but about understanding those fundamental, unchanging principles that govern the universe.
Exactly.
It's like we're decoding the mathematical secrets of reality.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's about going beyond those shadows, like in Plato's cave analogy, and stepping into the light of pure intellect where those forms exist.
That makes sense. But now I'm really curious about this third category, the believable. Where does that fit in?
This is where Xenocrates makes a really subtle distinction. He links the believable with the celestial realm, like the stars, planets, the movement of those heavenly bodies. He says that our understanding of these things, while valuable, is more like belief and not true knowledge.
So even though we can observe the heavens, track their movements, and develop all those complex astronomical theories, our knowledge of the cosmos is still just belief.
Precisely. And it's not that he's saying our efforts to understand the universe are worthless.
Okay.
It's more that he's acknowledging the limits of what we can know, especially when dealing with something as complex and ever-changing as the celestial bodies.
Right, right.
Our theories about astronomy are always being updated as we make new observations and come up with new interpretations.
That's a really insightful point. Even with all our advanced technology, when we look up at the night sky, there's still that sense of mystery and awe. We're always adjusting our understanding of the universe. But we have to admit that we might never have a complete and final picture.
I think Xenocrates would appreciate that humility. He understood that true knowledge is a journey, not a destination. We aim to grasp those eternal forms, those unchanging truths, but we also have to recognize that our understanding of the universe is constantly changing, always open to new insights.
So we have these 3 realms of knowing.
Yeah.
The perceptible, where our senses give us a glimpse of the physical world. The intelligible, where we try to understand those eternal forms and achieve true knowledge.
Right.
And the believable, where we deal with the complexities of the celestial realm. We form beliefs based on what we observe and calculate, but we always have to be open to revising those beliefs.
Exactly.
It's a really fascinating way to think about how we know things and the limits of what we can know.
It is. And it really shows Xenocrates' understanding of both the strengths and the weaknesses of human reason.
Yeah.
He believed we could achieve genuine knowledge, but he also knew that some aspects of reality would always remain a mystery.
And it seems like this approach to knowledge is so relevant today, even with all the information we have access to.
It is.
We're constantly bombarded with data and opinions. It's more important than ever to be able to tell the difference between what we can truly know and what's just belief or speculation.
I agree. Xenocrates' framework gives us some really valuable tools for navigating all that.
It does.
It encourages us to think critically, to question our assumptions, and to be open to different viewpoints. It reminds us that learning is an ongoing process.
It's a lifelong adventure of exploring and discovering.
Absolutely.
Well, I think it's safe to say we've done a pretty thorough job diving into the philosophical world of Xenocrates.
I think so too.
We've explored his very unique ideas about the soul, the cosmos, and how we acquire knowledge. And even though we only have these fragments of his work, I think we've painted a pretty good picture of this philosopher who dared to think differently and really pushed the boundaries of philosophy.
It's been great exploring these ideas with you. I hope everyone listening has a better understanding of this often overlooked figure in the history of Western thought.
I agree. Xenocrates reminds us that philosophy is a living tradition, a conversation that continues through the ages and across cultures. And even though his voice may be faint over the centuries, his ideas still resonate with us today. They challenge us to think deeper about the world and our place in it. So until our next deep dive, keep those philosophical gears turning.